Grandpa Everett's live broadcast began its course, first showing my empty, slightly trembling hands, and then moving onto the frame capturing my bedroom door. "I'll be 16 soon," I whispered into the phone, trying to hold back the excitement that was rising in my chest like a flooding wave. "Are you ready for this, Grandpa?" Grandpa's voice, full of good-natured laughter, rang out in my headphones. "I'm more ready than ever," I replied, feeling the warmth of his words penetrate my heart, giving me confidence. I pushed open the door, and the air in the room was filled with the smell of freshness, as if every corner still retained traces of my hopes. I remembered how I always dreamed of having my own studio where I would create art. There, by the window, was a white crib, in the rays of the midday sun, and around it were my old paintings, posters, and memories. Everything in this space seemed to freeze, but still something was changing. Even the ducks dancing on the walls, painted on freshly painted pale yellow paint, seemed alive. I silently sat down by the window, pressed myself against the frame and thought, trying not to let the tears fall. My voice sounded quieter than I wanted to as I headed downstairs, walking down the stairs and listening to my parents' voices coming from Dad's office. I felt my legs getting heavy and my thoughts getting confused as I pushed open the office door. Inside, they were Dad, hunched over in an armchair, and Mom, in her custom-made blazer, standing by the window. "What happened to my room?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. All this was prepared in advance. "Your room is now for Serafina," Mom said, pronouncing the word change with such a bitter taste, as if she was wrapping me in my childhood in a bundle. "We decided it was time for you to go with Aunt Callista," she added, as if that was how it was supposed to be. Dad didn't answer, just held his breath and focused on his cup of coffee again. I looked at him, but his eyes were filled with nothing but emptiness. "You know that your sister is starting a family, she needs our support," my mother continued, as if I were not a child, but an adult who should understand. The words sounded like a sharp rebuke, and I felt the pain overwhelm me. I turned to the door, grabbed the handle, and looked around, trying to remember the moment. Mom's last words were replaying in her head, "Grow up." I smiled through my tears. Yes, it's time. But even at that moment, everything became clearer than ever before. The place in this house is no longer mine. Something flashed in Mom's reflection in the window, quickly disappeared, barely perceptible. There wasn't the slightest sense of guilt on her face, just something like worry, as always when she wasn't sure what the right thing to do was. I stopped the live broadcast as I was climbing the stairs, but not before I whispered into the void, "Do you understand everything, Grandpa?" The answer came instantly and darkly. Every word was wrapped in cold. "Every word, honey, every word," he said, and I felt his anxiety, now so palpable. I stood in what had once been my bedroom and slowly ran my fingers over the smooth white railing of the crib. Everything here was really perfect, at first glance. Perfect, as if for an ideal baby, a golden child who would hardly ever come. But when I ran my finger over one of those funny, bright yellow ducks, I made a promise to myself that this wasn't the end of the story, not for a second. I'm not going to let this be the end. Aunt Callista's guest room smelled of lavender and fresh paint. She stayed up late, helping me hang garlands on the ceiling, turning simple walls into something almost magical, but at 3 a.m. even magic couldn't calm my agitated mind. The phone vibrated, and a message from Serafina flashed on the screen. "Mom says you're being clumsy because of the nursery. Can't you at least think of someone else for a while?" I turned off the phone, feeling like she was trying to reshape me again. I went downstairs, following the clink of plates, and found Callista standing at the kitchen counter, her dark hair tangled, her face tinged with fatigue. She was stirring something in the pot, couldn't sleep either. "Didn't you sleep?" she asked without turning around. I stood in the doorway, feeling the cold stare of her words, and was surprised to realize that she reminded me of my mother, even before she started wearing those ridiculous heels everywhere. Callista poured us hot chocolate, added a handful of mini marshmallows to the mugs, and handed one to me. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but something in it made me tense up. I hugged the mug, feeling the warmth seep into my frozen hands. "Did you know about their plans for my room?" I asked, although her voice didn't sound as harsh as usual. Callista stopped and, stirring the drink, sat down opposite. Her eyes were sharp, even in the dim light of the kitchen. "Do you remember your 10th birthday?" she said, as if that detail was the most important thing. I stared into the hot chocolate as if it could give me answers. An art exhibition that I've been preparing for weeks, a teacher who praised my talent, and Dad promised to come, but instead fell asleep in his office when Mom planned dinner with a client. The memories of that day tormented me, as always, when I was faced with their apathy. Mom even told me that art won't pay the bills. I clutched the mug in my hands. It all seemed empty and meaningless, as if it didn't exist. The phone rang again, and Callista glanced at the screen. Her face darkened. She said softly, "They're talking about your mother. Now she wants to send you home for a family dinner. Serafina has officially announced her pregnancy." She looked at me, and I felt my insides tighten. "You don't have to go," she said, but I already knew what I needed. I ran my finger along the edge of the mug, peering at its surface, and silently replied, "Yes, I will go. If I don't, they'll say that I'm being selfish again, making everything around me look like they made my birthday about Seraphin." Callista's voice was gentle, but her words sounded determined, as if she wanted to put meaning into my silent thoughts. My phone vibrated again upstairs, probably another message from Serafina. I could almost feel her detachment, her ability to suppress all emotions under a layer of smiles and beautiful words. I thought about her ideal life, a successful husband, a growing family, our parents, their constant approval. But in her gaze, in her hands, when she couldn't hide her trembling, I saw cracks that split her picture of happiness. I've seen her face get tense when her mom criticizes her weight or career choice. "You know what's funny?" I said, breaking the silence that hung heavily in the room. "When I was little, I thought Serafina had hung up the moon. She'd sneak into my room after Mom and Dad's parties, tell me stories about her college adventures. And then, when she met Richard, she suddenly became Mom's mini-me." Callista reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "People change, honey. Sometimes, not for the best." Her words were so sharp that I felt them sink deep into me like nails into wood. Yes, people change. And everything we once knew can be destroyed in one irreversible moment. I squeezed my back and stood up, feeling how hard it was for my feet to walk on the floor. "I should try to get some sleep," I said, getting ready for dinner, which I no longer wanted to attend. Callista called me as I was walking up the stairs. "Whatever you're planning, don't tell me you're not planning anything." Her voice was firm. "Just remember, revenge may be pleasant at the moment, but it won't fix what's broken." I stopped halfway, thinking about the live broadcast that Grandpa witnessed, about how Dad couldn't meet my eyes, about all the birthdays and art exhibitions that maybe I'll never forget. But I wasn't going to pretend that everything was okay. "No, I'm not going to pretend," I said quietly. "But I can't fix anything either." 3 days after the incident at the birthday party, Grandpa Everett's Mercedes drove into Aunt Callista's territory. I watched him change out of his formal suit into casual trousers and a sweater. He looked older than usual, kind of tired, like I'd never seen him before. "You shouldn't have come," I said when he came in. But my tight hugs betrayed how glad I was to see him, despite all the chaos. He smiled, but there was something in his eyes that I couldn't understand. "Yes, I came," he said, putting the leather briefcase on the coffee table. "Especially after what I witnessed on live TV." Callista came in with a cup of coffee. Her expression was restrained, but I saw the same hidden weight in her eyes. "Marlo called this morning. She's not happy about your presence," she said, sitting down opposite me. "Dad, Marlo, they haven't been happy about anything since she married that spineless one." She caught herself looking at me and apologized. Grandfather silently pulled out several documents from his briefcase, spreading them out on the table. I recognized the Whitman letterhead. "Your mother pressured me to sign control of the company," he said, straightening out the papers. "They claim that it's about succession planning, but the timing is interesting." "Isn't that the same thing?" They kicked me out a week ago. I took one of the documents and began to look through the legal jargon, which I barely understood. You didn't know anything, did you? The grandfather asked, and his voice became harsh. They forgot about our weekly video calls. Isn't that right, Callista? Callista leaned forward. What are you up to? She asked before Grandpa could answer. My phone rang again. Mom's face appeared on the screen. I showed it to my grandfather, and he nodded, turning on the speakerphone. Your mother, her voice filled the room. You and your father are waiting for you at dinner tonight. No excuses. I stood motionless, clutching the phone in my hand. Mom's voice on the other end of the line was harsh, giving no room for argument. This is not a request, she said. This is an announcement. Dinner is important to this family, and despite your recent attitude, you will be present. You're still part of this family. I felt my breath tighten, and I repeated her words to myself, trying not to let myself influence them too much. I caught a slight nod from my grandfather, who was sitting next to me. Okay, I'll be there, I replied, holding back my irritation. But we'll find something suitable, not those awful ripped jeans. The cue vibrated, and I fell silent, looking at the floor. Still part of the family? I repeated softly, almost not believing my words. It's funny how it works when they need something, I thought, but I didn't say it out loud. Grandpa tapped on the papers that were spread out on the table. They need more than you know, he said. The company is facing problems. Not serious yet, but enough to make your mother nervous about her position, and Serafina, her baby, is their backup plan. The perfect family image, he exhaled heavily. A successful daughter, a precious grandson, a disposable teenager, I added sarcastically. Grandpa's expression darkened. You've never been disposable, he said firmly. I felt his words touch me, but I wasn't going to argue. It was a moment when understanding came too late, and all that remained was humility. Oh, and it's time for your parents to remember. Grandpa pulled another document out of his briefcase. This is my current will. I'm making some changes. Callista, who was sitting next to me, stood up and intervened. Don't do anything rash. It would definitely be rash to let them continue this behavior, Grandpa said, and his voice became firm. He turned to me. I will also be present tonight. Uninvited, but... My stomach clenched with excitement. I clasped my hands and looked into his eyes. They will blame me. Let them blame you, he said. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for the people we love is to stop indulging their worst behavior, the grandfather added. I thought about his words, thinking about Mom's controlling voice, Dad's silence, about the life I was a part of, but which I could never understand. It all seemed so far away and alien, like the world that exists behind glass. Callista asked quietly, is it worse than being a burden to the people who should love you the most? I didn't answer. My thoughts were already there, behind those words that couldn't comfort me. The question is not whether this will worsen the situation, the grandfather continued. The question is, are you ready to show them who you really are? I picked up the phone and looked at the missed call from my mom. I think we'll find out over dinner, I said, turning to Grandpa. Yes, he said, and in his voice I heard that rare glimmer of the shrewd businessman who built an empire. I guess we'll do it. I arrived early for dinner, slipping through the kitchen door like in the old days when I was late for curfew. There were voices in Dad's office, Mom's harsh tone, Dad's quiet whisper, and Serafina. I crept closer to the half-open door. What about Allah? Asked Serafina. She's his favorite. Everyone knows that. Mom waved it off. She can't run the company. Besides, as soon as the baby is born, the father will forget about all her creative phases and teenage dramas. There was a rare note of concern in Papa Marlowe's voice. Maybe we should slow down in celebrating her birthday? Mom replied memorably, the way we did it was necessary. This girl should know her place. As the merger approached, Serafina's voice became more strident. Richard's company. Once we announce your pregnancy, the timing will be perfect. A family merger that ensures the future of both companies. My hand involuntarily went up to my mouth as soon as I realized that Serafina wasn't really talking about family. Richard was her husband, but he was also the head of their biggest competitor. The merger in question meant that they were using my child as a business deal. It was too obvious, but at the same time so terrifyingly sophisticated that I couldn't believe it was all happening right now. Serafina's voice cracked, and as if trying to justify herself, she said softly, "I am protecting the future mother of our family." But her words could not hide what was hidden in the depths of her soul, as if she understood that the game had long been out of her hands. Your sister seems to have decided to undermine something with her constant need for attention. Mom couldn't keep quiet anymore. She interrupted her. Speaking of attention, Dad drove up. I instinctively stepped back from the door, but it was too late. It swung open and I found myself face to face with my mom. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide the momentary flash of panic in her eyes. "How long have you been standing there?" Her voice was uncertain, but still angry. I felt my inner world begin to crumble. "Long enough," I said, and the words sounded more confident than I actually felt. Mom immediately pounced. "Is that why you wanted everything to be done so quickly in the nursery?" It was never about baby Serafina. It was about merging. Serafina appeared behind Mom, protecting her stomach with one hand. "It's not what you think," she began, but her voice was shaking. "In fact, it sounds like Mom is using your child to manipulate Grandpa and secure a business deal for herself." I met my mother's eyes, and she realized that her secret had been revealed. "You don't understand anything about business," she replied sharply. "We need to protect the legacy of this family." "Protect him?" I laughed, and the sound was harsh, even to my ears. "You mean control him like you're trying to control everything else?" I said, sharpening the moment. The doorbell rang, and I felt my nerves tighten. Dad came out of the office, straightening his tie. I looked at my mom. "This will be your grandfather just right," I said, and watched her face turn pale. I was sure that Grandpa would be happy to hear about the merger plans, about how his great-grandson is doing, just another business asset. Mom hissed, "You wouldn't dare." There was a hint of menace in her voice, but I felt her power begin to shake. I thought about my empty room upstairs, about the years spent on fogged-up art exhibitions and conditional love. I thought about Serafina's face when she found out that her child was just another piece in Mom's game. "Try it," I said, turning to the door. Mom grabbed my hand. "If you mess it up." Her voice was full of menace. I didn't answer and pulled away from her grip, heading for the front door. My step was firm, despite how hard my heart was pounding. I could hear my mother's heels tapping rapidly on the floor, hurrying to catch up with me. The game was about to change, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for it anymore. In the kitchen, I saw college brochures spread out on Aunt Callista's table. Everything that Mom hated, everything that I could love: art programs, photography, creative writing. Callista was pushing me towards one of the brochures. "She is as far away from here as possible. Without leaving the country." My phone vibrated again, and I saw a message from Serafina. "We need to talk in private." I ignored her. I haven't opened these messages since everything collapsed at a family dinner 3 days ago, when Grandpa found out about the merger plans and ran out of the house. Mom hasn't spoken to me since, but her silence said a lot more than any words. It was a silence full of despair, irritation, and perhaps a sense of loss of control. Alla tapped on the brochure that lay on the table in front of me, as if trying to bring me back to reality. "You're miles away," she said, but I couldn't concentrate. My phone vibrated again, and I immediately realized it was a message from Serafina's husband, Richard. "Meeting at the office. Important information about your mother's plans. Come alone." I stood up abruptly. "I have to go," I said, trying to hide my excitement. "There's something I need to deal with." Callista caught my arm. "Whatever you're planning, remember what happened the last time you tried to meet them alone." I showed her a message from Richard. He can provide evidence of the merger. Something we can show Grandpa, or it could be a trap. She frowned. At least let me take you. They'll see your car. I shook my head. No, I'll take the bus. I grabbed my jacket. Besides, I'm tired of hiding. The corporate office loomed ahead, a huge glass and steel building where every corner hides its secrets. The guard barely glanced at my student ID before waving me inside. Richard's office was on the top floor overlooking the city, which probably cost more than my entire education if I had any money for college at all. When the elevator doors opened, I expected to see Richard, but instead I saw my mother. I knew you were coming, she said, stepping into the elevator before I could step back. So predictable. The doors closed and we started to climb. Where's Richard? I asked. At home with your sister. By the way, she's completely devastated by your betrayal, Mom added, her voice suddenly cold. Suddenly, she pressed the emergency stop button, and the elevator abruptly stopped. We were left in limbo, surrounded by emptiness and high walls. We need to talk about your future. I laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. You mean the one you're trying to control, like everything else? I asked. Mom pulled out the envelope, and I noticed its weight, as a symbol of the decision she was trying to impose on me. She handed me a letter of admission to Switzerland, an elite boarding school, very far away, very exclusive. My throat tightened. You can't make me leave. Don't think about Seraphine, she said. The stress you're causing can harm her child. Think about your father. His position in the company depends on this merger. She held out the envelope as if it was the only chance for salvation, a fresh start. Isn't that what you want? I stood watching her calm face, and despite her best efforts, it became clear to me that she was ready to use any methods to achieve her goal. You know what's funny? I said, I used to think Serafina was happy, your perfect daughter. Your pride and joy. But now I see, she's just as trapped as I am. Something flashed in her eyes, a moment of fear before she could hide it. Before she could answer, my phone vibrated again. A message from Grandpa. Don't sign anything. Mom saw the text, and her hand squeezed the envelope. It's time to choose, Celera. Her voice became hard, as if shackling me in this choice. Your family's stability or your selfish desires? The elevator continued to buzz around us, hovering between floors, and I felt my answer hanging in the air, like a difficult choice between two worlds. I thought about the college brochures, how Serafina shook hands, about the years spent trying to earn the love that should have been unconditional, and how instead I found myself in the middle of this game. I reached for the envelope. My heart was beating in my chest with such force that I was sure it was about to burst out. I took the envelope from Mom's hand and tore it in half. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot, cutting off all the space between us. Mom froze, her face turned pale, and her voice became deadly quiet, as if it reflected all her fear and hatred of what was happening. A mistake, she said, her words piercing me, but I no longer felt regret. The elevator came back to life, rising to the top floor. When the doors opened, I found myself face to face with Dad and Richard, as well as two guards who were holding their breath watching the scene. Mom walked past me, ignoring my gaze. I was trying to give you an easy way out, she said, and there was a restless weariness in her voice. Now we're going to do it the hard way. Richard held up a document, and his smile was cold and confident. Sign this and we'll forget about what you did at dinner. Your grandfather will never know about your little outburst. I looked between them, and the cold truth about how they used Serafina as a manipulation tool pierced me like a knife edge. The truth that was hidden under the mask of caring and family harmony. Dad finally spoke, his words hitting the mark. You've become unstable, dangerous to this family's reputation. Dangerous. I laughed, but it was a broken laugh, full of despair. I'm not going to play your games anymore, I said. Mom nodded to the guards, and one of them pulled out a tablet on which I immediately recognized the footage from the dinner. But something was wrong. The video was edited, and now I looked like an unbalanced person, screaming, aggressive. My words about the merger were cut out, and a fragment was inserted instead, as if I were cursing Serafina and her child. Richard, smiling softly, said, "If something goes viral, you wouldn't want it." "You wouldn't dare," I said in a whisper, but thoughts were spinning in my head about how Mom, despite everything, was ready to do this for her goal. She handed me the papers, and her voice became firm. "Agree to a boarding school, otherwise this video will become public. Think about what this will do to your college applications. With your future." The elevator rang again and the doors opened. Grandpa appeared, followed by Aunt Callista. The relief that came over me was almost physical, but when I saw their faces, that relief quickly turned to pain. Grandpa looked at the video and his voice became heavy with disappointment. "How could you?" he said. But I tried to explain that it was fake. "No, it's fake," I tried to say, but Mom came forward, showing everyone her concern. "We tried to deal with it privately," she said. "Your father has been having difficulties since we announced Serafina's pregnancy. The therapist suggested that a change of scenery might help." I shook my head. "I'm not having any difficulties," I replied, but my voice broke and I sounded just like the unbalanced teenager they depicted on the video. They edited this video to undermine me. I tried to tell Callista to step in, but her face was torn between loyalty and truth. "You don't understand me," she whispered, and I saw her faith in me crumble. Mom handed me a pen. "Sign it. Sign it and let's forget about it as a family." But I couldn't look into their eyes anymore. With every word, with every moment, as I plunged deeper into their manipulations, I lost my future, my place in this family. My hand was shaking when I took the pen. The document was full of legal terms that I could barely comprehend at the time of this struggle. But one phrase stood out: a voluntary commitment to enter a medical institution with accommodation. Not a boarding school, but a psychiatric institution. Last chance. Mom said softly, "Choose wisely." My phone vibrated for the last time. Message from Serafina: "Don't sign anything, I have proof." I gritted my teeth, but when I looked at the wall of faces facing me, at the trap they had carefully built, I realized something terrible. Sometimes it hurts more to hold on than to let go. I pressed the pen to the paper. My signature is the only weapon I left behind. The documents for admission to the medical complex became heavy in my hands, as if they themselves were trying to detain me. But at that moment, the office door swung open. Serafina stood there panting, one hand pressed to her stomach, protecting it as if her body had become a shield for both of us. She ordered her voice to be stronger than I've ever been able to. "No one signs anything," her words cut into the silence. Mom came forward, glaring at me. "Serafina, you shouldn't be here in your condition." "My condition?" Serafina laughed harshly and bitterly. "You mean the state you used to manipulate everyone?" She took out her phone. I wrote it all down. A conversation with Richard about the merger, about plans to use my child to provide for Grandpa's fortune. Even your instructions to the video editor about faking frames. The room became deathly quiet. Richard's smug expression cracked. My father's face turned white. Mom, not believing her ears, said, "You're lying." But her voice was trembling, and I felt the truth slowly seeping into her mind. Serafina pressed the play button. Mom's voice filled the room. Crystal clear, cold and merciless, cut out everything about fusion. Make it look unstable. Once she makes a decision, no one will believe her anyway. Grandpa moved faster than I've ever seen him. He snatched the decision documents out of my hands and tore them into pieces. "Marlo," his voice was shaking with rage. I felt his words stabbing into me like a knife. Mom tried to explain, but her explanations were not valid. "I could explain," she said, but her words no longer made sense. "You were willing to send your own daughter to a psychiatric hospital to protect your lies." My mother's composure finally broke down, and I realized that everything she was doing was just protecting her legacy. The merger ensured the future of this family. If you just kept quiet, if you disappeared. Mom took off, but Serafina got between us. That's enough, she said firmly. Mother, I won't let you do to my child what you did to Allah. It ends now. Richard moved towards the door. This is ridiculous. I never agreed to sit down. But Grandpa ordered no one to leave until we figure it out. He turned to his mother, and his face became hard. You're done here, March. From now on, you are excluded from the board of directors of the company. The merger is cancelled. You can't, I can, and I'll do it. The company goes into the hands of Callista and AA, Serafina too, if she wants it. He looked at each of us in turn. It's time for this family to remember what's really important. Mom's face contorted, her eyes flashed lightning. Conrad said something, and Dad slowly stood up. For the first time in my memory, he met my mother's gaze. I realized that I should have said something 16 years ago, but the words somehow stuck in my throat. He turned to me. I'm sorry, Al, I was a coward, a coward. Mom's laugh was hysterical. You're all cowards, destroying everything I've built. She wailed, trying to get her footing in empty words. You haven't built anything. Serafina interrupted her. You just controlled and manipulated until you got what you wanted. But you forgot something, Mom. You forgot that a real family cannot be bought or controlled. I looked at my sister, at her for real. I saw not a perfect appearance, but a scared little girl who once told me bedtime stories. She was the same. Trapped, just like me. Video, I said softly. Let him out. Everyone stared at me like I was crazy. Release a real video. I continued. Let everyone see the truth. There's no need to hide anymore. Mom's face turned pale. She took a step forward. You wouldn't dare. Serafina's finger hovered over her phone. Try us, she said, and I saw Mom's facade crumbling, her cold confidence bursting at the seams. I realized something important. Sometimes the best revenge is not the destruction of enemies. Sometimes it finally becomes strong enough to leave. I took Serafina's hand. Come on, sis, let's go home. But not to a house with empty rooms and empty promises, but somewhere else, somewhere new, where there is the present. 6 months later, I stood in front of an easel at the Berkeley Spring Art Show, watching people explore my world in a painting. It was a nursery, but not perfect. The one that Mom drew. But it was real. Shadows in the corners, imperfect walls, and golden light. Even her flaws make her beautiful. It's haunting me, said a voice behind me. I turned around and saw Serafina. Her little daughter was sleeping on her shoulder. Although yellow ducks are cute, I was thinking about painting them white, I confessed. But some things deserve to stay bright. She smiled as she adjusted the sleeping child. Mom asked about you yesterday, she said. I think she finally looked at the therapeutic pamphlets Dad gave her. And nothing. But she's trying. Meanwhile, Grandpa and Callista appeared, good-naturedly arguing about the new direction of the company. The art therapy program for at-risk teenagers was my idea, but Callista brought it to life. Even Dad started volunteering, teaching photography on weekends. Your mother's letter has arrived, Grandpa said quietly, holding out a worn envelope. The one she wrote before you were born. I thought you should have it. I took it, feeling it fall heavily into my hand. Have you read this? My grandfather asked. No, I said, but I remember. When she wrote it, she was different. Then it became softer, before the company became everything it could be. I put the letter in my pocket unopened. Maybe someday I'll want to read about the mother she was, but not today. Today was a day about who I'm becoming. The scholarship committee is here, I whispered, nodding towards a group of professors who were ready to evaluate my portfolio. Actually, I said I wanted to show them something else first. I led them to the back of the gallery, where there was a large canvas weighted to look like a sheet. This painting took months of countless drafts and more courage than I thought I had. I took the sheet off her. The painting depicted our family, but not in the perfect pose of the old portraits. Instead, she captured real moments. Serafina, reading her daughter's stories. Callista and Grandpa laughing over a cup of coffee. Dad is behind his camera. Even Mom was there, far away, but she was present. The shadow began to take on a new shape, and in the center was a teenage girl at an easel, finally visible, finally whole. "Oh, dear," Callista sighed. "It's called a family portrait, unfinished." I explained because we're still working on it, aren't we? Serafina squeezed my hand, and later, after the scholarship committee left with an offer I couldn't refuse, and the gallery was empty, I found myself alone with my paintings. My phone vibrated with a message from my mom. "The new art therapy program is a good job. You're good at it." Not an apology, not yet. But maybe, like my painting, we were all unfinished, work in progress. I thought about the unopened letter in my pocket, about the mother she was and the only one she has become. About how sometimes the hardest part of growing up is realizing that your parents are also growing up in their own way, imperfectly. I got another message from Dad, who has always been proud of you, baby. I looked at my family portrait one last time before covering it for the night. The shadows were there, but there was also a light that made even the darkest corners glow with possibility. Like in a child's painting, it wasn't perfect, but maybe there was no point in being perfect. Perhaps the point was to learn to see beauty in broken places, strength in struggle, and hope in spaces that we leave empty in anticipation of being filled by what comes next. I turned off the lights in the gallery and stepped into the evening, ready for my next painting.